So it's 4:30 PM on February 11th, and call to order the Finance Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Schaefer.
Here.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Here.
Chairman Hellinger.
Here. Next up, approval of the motion summary of the meeting held on August 19th. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Schaefer.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Jones.
Yes.
Chairman Hellinger.
Yes. All right, next up, review of the 2019 year-end financial report and January 2020 financial report.
Thanks, council members. In your packet, just have a year-end financial report for 2019. I just wanted to go over some highlights that I've identified based on reviewing this.
You can pull the mic.
Is that better?
Ask Elaine.
We'll start talking and I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. Council members, on page 1, just some highlights. General fund ending cash balance ended up at about $6.22 million for December 31. That's roughly an increase of 1.0545 million from the beginning of 2019. On page 2, for revenues for all major operating funds, some highlights are the increase from 2019 compared to 2018 for the street maintenance fund, an increase of about 26%. That's primarily attributed to the gas tax increase that went into effect last year. Also, if you keynote is the fire EMS income tax. The revenue increase from income taxes was almost 3% for the year. In the middle section for expenditures, total expenditures were about $39.5 million, and that's a decrease as compared to $41.2 million for 2018. So what's nice is when you compare all these operating funds, total revenue increased by roughly $1.5 to $2 million for 2019, and expenditures were down as well. So you're in a great position there for all these operating funds. Going into page 3, evaluating total cash for all funds. As of the end of 2019, total cash was about $76.4 million, and that's an increase from 2018 from about $70.4 million. From my review, most of this increase was increased cash balances in the fire EMS fund, water, sewer, and the water and sewer capacity fee fund. So,
You following? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
sorry if I'm moving too fast. From what I'm evaluating, it seems, with the revenue increase from income tax receipts, additional water and sewage consumption, and then capacity fee charges from new development is increasing the total cash in all funds. Moving forward in the report, jumping to page 6, just a summary of general fund revenues. If you compare the 2019 allocation of all income tax revenue, it was about 65% of all revenue for the general fund. And you compare that to 2009, total income tax collected accounted for about 67% of total revenue. Moving forward to page 9, just found it interesting. You look at an allocation of general fund expenditures, most of the costs for the general fund are allocated to police and 911 services, and that's been consistent over the last decade. Page 10, just an overall summary of revenues by source. Key highlight from this report, gasoline taxes, there was a 26% increase again because of the gas tax increase. And for reimbursements, I did notice there was a pretty significant decline in engineering fees. My plan was to talk to the planning department and get some additional detail behind that decline. These declines were offset by capacity fee charges, so you can see collectively we collected about $2 million more in water and sewer capacity fees for the year.
I think that change in reimbursements was the way we changed the way we were billing. And Alicia, can you explain how we're doing that now? You got to bring the microphone.
Yes, so we were billing these up front and then reimbursing people at the end. And last
Okay.
year was a transition year where we switched to kind of bringing them up in line with when the work was being done.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of artificially low, and then we're hoping it goes back up again
Right.
this
Yeah.
year.
Great.
And Rob, you're involved in that as well, right? In terms of the billing.
Yeah, I think we weren't reimbursing them
Well, what happening was we estimated the cost of the project. They paid that, and their issue was if it was less, you know, we should be owed something. That's not really the way the code worked. So we changed the code, and Rob, you've now been involved in the billing piece, right?
Yeah.
You can pull the microphone down there.
Like you said, Tom, we were pre-billing them based on the developer's calculation as to what the whole development was going to be, and there was no reconciliation done after that development ended. And that was actually a change. We used to bill them monthly years and years ago, and then something happened that we changed it 15 years ago, Tom. And so now we've changed it back. We're billing them every month or every 2 months, and we're staying on top of it. But until these developments progress even more, revenues were down significantly because of that. So.
Great, thank you. Moving on to page 11, the airport fund, just a key highlight, the unreserved cash balance in the fund at the end of 2019 was $156,000. Did note also that fuel sales were up by about $40,000 compared to 2018, so a total sales price of about $681,000.
So Justin or Alicia, what is, simple math, what's the general fund subsidy then to the airport?
It is $30,000.
Okay, which is
It's been
probably
pretty
more manageable than $300,000, but it's still not covering its cost.
Right. And that $30,000 transfer has been consistent since 2017.
Now, where are we at with the studies being done on the airport?
I just spoke with a consultant today. We actually had some delays that I brought to the attention of the principal of the firm yesterday. He followed up with our consultant, and next Thursday, we're supposed to have the final report.
Okay, good.
And that final report will hopefully be some recommendations about some changes in how we kind of do business out there. So we're looking forward to that.
Why is the GP on the fuel sales so low compared to 5 years ago? Have we not raised our prices or anything?
Councilman, I don't know. I can ask that and get that answer back to you.
I mean, going from 90% GP to 54 is a pretty big drop. So we're not doing something right.
Where are you, Chris?
This
On
is
the bottom, page 11.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, thanks. I'll get that to you tomorrow. No other questions. Starting on page 13, just the Gulf Fund. I do remember in Dean's presentation to council on this report, if I remember correctly, there was a transition of payroll from one position to a different fund. So you'll see there's a positive cash flow in this fund for the end of the year of about $41,000.
It's probably the first time in 10 years, probably, isn't it?
Martha's Day in history. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the issues that had been brought up consistently by council.
And then, starting with some of the enterprise funds for the water fund, just had a notation, the bottom of page 14, total reserves in the water fund operations was about $16.2 million at the end of 2019. For page 15, for the sewer operations, total cash was about $15.5 million. For the refuse fund on page 16, total cash net reserve was about $486,000. This fund probably, we need to evaluate the cash balances. It probably should be up a little bit compared to operating expenses, probably somewhere around $850,000. What I find in some of the enterprise funds, it's kind of cyclical if they need vehicle replacements, so we'll be watching this as well. And then the last page, page 17, is the storm sewer fund. Total cash reserve on page 17 was about $1.55 million. So all the enterprise funds are doing really well, especially when you consider for water and wastewater what the debt balances are at the end of 2019. Page 18, total outstanding debt at the end of the year was about $95 million. Just a quick review, roughly 59% or $56 million of that outstanding debt is attributed to water and wastewater debt. 15.26 million or 16% is allocated to recreation debt, and then roughly 25% or 23.74 million is attributed to general obligations.
This is the point that we've made to Moody's consistently, is that.
Right.
That's got a dedicated, most of that debt has a dedicated revenue source attached to it, so.
And then page 18 is just a summary of the self-funded health insurance fund. Just some key highlights that I found for the end of 2019. Total costs were up by about 11.8%, or $772,000. And net costs for the plan, there was about a 7% increase overall from 2018 to 2019. So it does seem we're having increased healthcare spending in this fund as well over the last few years.
And that's something that we've talked about we'll be evaluating in terms of taking a look at the kind of plan we have now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, are you going to an HSA? Are we
Well,
already at
actually,
it?
that's one of the things we're looking at, actually, and you can, Alicia, fill in the blanks, or Justin on this.
I had talked to Dean about this before he left, and with, because the plan is self-funded, I don't know, we definitely want to look at HSAs, but because it's self-funded, I don't know what the savings would be right now. Now, if you were paying premiums to a third-party insurance company, you know, if you're putting money into an HSA on the employee and employer side, you definitely see some savings. But what Dean explained to me, because we self-fund in self-insurance pool, it might be a little difficult, but I definitely want to look at it. It's really important. Is there any other questions on the 2019 report? Next up in your packet is the January 2020 financial report. Starting on page 2, just some key highlights. Income tax collections in the overall for all three sources were up by about 6% year over year. One other item on reimbursements for the prosecutor reimbursement, that money was not received in January. It posted the first week of February, so that'll be in the February report. Page 3, again on the general fund revenues, the decline is primarily attributed to the prosecutor contract not coming in January. And on general fund expenditures, you're going to notice a large decline in total spending year over year. The reason is there was no transfer from the general fund to other operating funds, such as that self-insurance fund in January. That'll be caught up in February, so that'll normalize this report next month. And then moving in through the other operating funds on both revenues and expenditures, you're going to see variations throughout all these funds as well for the month of January because the transfers were not posted. So that's impacting both revenues and expenditures for each fund. And then on page 5, ending fund balance for all funds was about, when I calculated, it's about $73.9 million. And that's an increase from January of 2019, which was about $69 million. So that's roughly an increase of 7% year over year. And then page 6, just a breakdown of the employee health insurance plan. This again will change going into February. And then on page 7, just a summary of the income tax collections over the last 3 years, and then including the month of January 2020. This is on page 7, so we have a breakdown of the 3 tax types: the individual withholdings, business withholdings, and personal withholdings.
And could you just mention the net profit tax and some of the reimbursements that we had, the refunds that we had to provide?
Yes, what we find, and I noticed this in Marysville, some employers might, when they make a quarterly deposit on their net profit, they might overstate their earnings, and then when their fiscal year ends, they're due a refund. They might also experience a loss in a future quarter, and that might impact what their refund could be. Going to some tax conferences throughout the state, some cities are hit larger than this than others. I've heard in Findlay, because they have some large manufacturing companies, they might have really large tax rebates or tax refunds on the net profit side.
And they changed the net profit. The state changed that as well.
Right. So now corporations have the option to file their net profit return through the Ohio Business Gateway. And because of that, there's a delay sometimes in getting those tax payments from the state. Also, the state takes a 1% collection fee off the net profits that are collected. So what we found, a lot of telecom companies, a lot of plumbing companies, professional service companies are doing their net profit just because they operate all around the state and they feel it's a lot easier for them.
And we had considerable refunds last year, didn't we?
I haven't had a chance to look at that,
Okay.
but it's one thing I'm still working on evaluating.
Okay. Okay.
Are there any questions on the January 2020 financials? Thanks. One other item I have in your packet. This is the format that we use to present the monthly financials in Marysville. I was wondering if you have the time, maybe the next time we meet, if you have a chance to review this format and read over it and let me know if this is something you'd like to start changing the monthly reports on. It includes narratives on the major operating funds, such as the general fund, the 4 enterprise funds. There's also a fund in Marysville, it's similar to the fire EMS fund, security of persons and property. And we could also include the capital improvement fund in this report too, since that's such a big component of the Delaware budget.
I think it looks awesome.
Yeah, I've told
Yeah, I think the narrative
Justin, the narrative is really helpful.
Yeah. Very helpful, yeah. Yeah, I like it.
And so we could,
All right,
we can
do you-
just start that.
Yeah, so for February, we'll use this format, but if there's other funds that you want in the narrative, just let me know and I can incorporate that.
Okay.
Great. That's all I had on the monthly financial reports.
Okay. All right, so any other questions
Just
at this point?
real quick, Justin, I just happened to notice looking at the Marysville fund, that you guys, Marysville's got a couple of the Star Ohio funds.
Yeah, I used Star Ohio for liquidity. We also use the third-party investment advisory firm to handle long-term investments, and they are fee-based only. So we essentially split the core portfolio up in half. Half was long-term investments, and then the other half was short-term in Star Ohio.
Did we ever get anywhere with that?
Well, we had met with them with, I can't think of the name of the firm.
Meter investments?
Meter Investments, and they do, the issue is they already provide,
They are the fund administrator for Star Ohio.
Right.
and so the question was there, if they're already doing that, does it make sense to bring them on for us? And so this is a conversation we.
Right.
Justin and I were
Well,
gonna.
I just wondered if it would make sense for us to put some of our money in the Star Ohio fund. Does that make sense?
So right now, on the investment side, all the treasury is invested in Star Ohio. There's one Star Ohio account, it has a balance of about $85 million in it. Yields have been going down, I believe Fed funds rate is 1.75%, so for the budget this year, I don't know if we're gonna meet that revenue target for interest income. But one thing to consider down the line is maybe splitting up some of the treasury into long-term portfolios to get additional interest income.
And you want to mention the RFP banking?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Tom. So Dean had prepared a draft RFP for banking services. The intent is next month, working through Kyle's department, DAS, issuing an RFP for banking services, just to see what else is out there on the treasury management side. Also to evaluate, what I hope to do is really expand the acceptance of credit cards for all payment types. And then also, we need to do this in advance of launching the Munis project, because Munis is highly integrated with the
Mention,
banking.
refresh their memory on what Munis is.
Munis, sorry, is the ERP system that the city is transitioning to. And there's a really big, the third module of the project is the utility billing upgrade. And there's a really great website that's supported that accepts credit cards and e-checks for utility bills. So we would want a defined bank in place to kind of have all the banking relationships set up before that system goes in place.
And now's the time.
Yeah.
To do that.
Sure.
And we have noticed a change, I think, in service levels with the Delaware County Bank transitioning to First Commonwealth.
First Commonwealth.
And Rob is at the epicenter of that, right, Rob? So,
Great.
Good deal. Well, let's move on to the meat of our discussion today here then, discussion of transportation funding options.
Great.
yeah, I asked Justin to put together a presentation that kind of reviews what the gaps are, which everybody knows, and then what are some of the options, so we can start that conversation with the Finance Committee and then subsequently with Council.
Great. Thanks, council members. So for this slide, it's presentation. Bill did a really nice job of outlining funding sources and funding uses for the paving program. So the first two slides, he actually presented the other night at the regular city council meeting. So this here, again, is just a summary of the current funding and proposed funding and what the deficit is of about $1.6 million. And then the next slide is just a kind of breakdown of the programmatic funding allocation that is currently there and what's been proposed. So this first slide, just giving some background in Marysville. Marysville each year would attempt to allocate $1.5 million for paving, and that equals 1/25 of all roadway improvements in Marysville. So the general recommendation for me, I know Bill has it broken down by street type, is generally 1/25 of all roads. The other key component for the paving program is getting the paving bids out as early as possible. If you have the appropriations fully established in January and you go to bid or open bids in February, you really have first shot of cheaper pricing on paving programs. So that's a real key critical component. And then again, just outlining that the funding deficit that Public Works has identified is about $1.6 million. One item, what Tom had asked me to look at is different funding mechanisms to kind of eliminate this $1.6 million funding gap. One item would essentially be to look at a possible reduction in the credit for residents that work outside of the city elsewhere. We have a general idea based on initial numbers that this reduction of the credit could potentially finance the complete $1.6 million. The critical item that I've talked to Tom about is we really have to capture all the W-2 data for a full year to really evaluate where taxpayers are working and what they're paying. I don't know if we'll probably have good numbers going into the summer after the tax season is completed, but really you'd like at least 1 year's worth of tax data from W-2s to really evaluate what kind of modification of the credit would look like. The other thing to consider on this, because the tax is split into 3 levies essentially, if you do a credit essentially to raise money for the paving program, it's going to have an ancillary impact on the fire EMS and recreation, where those funds would get more money when they don't necessarily need it. So this option is in my opinion, a little tricky to administer.
Not to mention the political side of it.
Right.
Well, that's
Yeah.
Right.
the other
We
question.
can't ignore that
Yeah.
piece of it, yeah.
But right now, Lori and her staff in the tax department are starting right now as returns come in to start capturing the W-2 data. So we have really good information for Tom and City Council. Are there any other questions on this?
Right now, I guess you in Marysville offers,
There's 0 credit in Marysville. So over the last 2 years, the intent was to establish a 0.25% credit because there's no offsetting credit right now. So we started 3 years ago capturing W-2 data, and next year is the evaluation date based on what that reduced revenue would be by offering a 0.25% credit. Ideally, if you're tinkering with the credit itself, you really want 3 years worth of data, in my opinion. Next slide is basically a real estate levy option. So if you evaluate what the total valuation, taxable valuation of residential units is, or actually all property in the city of Delaware, it's about $892 million. If you applied a 1 mil levy, that would generate about $893,000 a year. Now, if you look on Zillow, they have the general sales price or valuation for a property in Delaware to be about $249,000. A 1 mil levy per year would cost a homeowner about $87. Another option that we've been kind of evaluating is we have some inside millage, and it's split in 3 buckets. Doing some research to see possibly for one of the kind of sets of inside millage, could it be reallocated toward paving? Right now, the revenue estimate for one of those sections of the inside millage is about $267,000. And if we could get that reappropriated or reallocated, that could go towards the paving program as well.
So what is the inside millage? Just
So inside millage is unvoted millage that was kind of established decades ago. So if you're familiar with how school levies work, let's say you get just a regular 1 mil levy on for school operations. The effective rate on that millage doesn't change with property valuations. It stays the same. Now, the nice thing about inside millage is if the property value goes up, the effective tax goes up as well. But if valuations go down, you're going to lose money on the millage too. Another item could be special assessments for road maintenance. So one idea could be if you have a set road or a set block that needs to be paved, and you know each resident, each household on that block and what the cost is to pave, you could do maybe like a 25-year assessment to recoup those monies.
I wanted to have, after Justin, Alicia did a little research on this.
Right.
You want to just talk about that?
Okay, so the case study that I mentioned is Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and what they did was more of a cost-sharing road maintenance assessment. And the way that that worked is that the city paid 50%, the resident on either side paid 25% of the street. If the street was wider than a certain amount, wider than standard, the city covered that additional cost. The city was responsible for all of the intersections and pieces like that. They were fully covered by the city. And then houses that were on a corner were eligible for corner house credit up to so many feet. And then they also put restrictions on how often they could occur. So you didn't have to worry about this happening every 6 years. So that was just kind of a pretty well thought out way that they, just a way to do it that was fair.
And again, that's not necessarily the most desirable way to approach it. But there is a mechanism out there, similar to the way you're doing your sidewalk assessments. So we wanted to make sure we at least looked at it, made you aware of it, right?
And then the last slide, it's just kind of a breakdown of projected revenues from some of these ideas. We did not include any revenue assessment or estimate for the special assessments, but if you tally up all three of these ideas with estimates, it gets you relatively close to the 1.6 million that's needed, or that's been identified.
But that 1.6 million, didn't that already take into account the fact that we were getting the gas tax? Didn't Bill already take into account?
No, not right now. It's still, I believe right now that Bill's identified an additional 1.6 million over and above what the gas tax receipts have been.
That 1.6 includes that $800,000, isn't it?
I guess that's what I'm asking. When you ran the numbers, wasn't he already assuming that we had the 800,000 from
Yes.
the gas tax?
The increased gas tax, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that
we added it
that
back in
includes,
here.
right. So that 1.6 million is still the
Above-
deficit
Right. So if
that exists after that increase in gas tax revenues.
So the gas tax increase obviously has been a big help, but even still, a lot of municipalities are still kind of behind on the paving program.
Wasn't there
so-
some sort of 800 grand that we get from the state or something?
that local
that-
government fund,
but-
maybe?
I don't know, Bill, because if that goes, we're not guaranteed to get it.
Oh, you're
If it
talking
goes
about,
away,
you're talking about the public works.
Oh, OPWC money.
Yeah, the OPWC
So every year
money.
we apply for an
But if that
OPWC.
goes
Which is-
away, then that.
Right,
goes to
then
2 million.
Yeah, there's an asterisk in one of his presentations that talks about, when he looks at his revenues, it might even be in here, he's,
Right.
that last bullet, grant funding is not guaranteed, either between the county or OPWC, so,
But it's an assumption based on
Right.
historical,
right,
Perspective.
awards that we've received, I
Yeah.
mean, and at some point that could change. So if you agree that the 1.6 is defensible in terms of how that was arrived at through Bill's analysis, which is taking a look at total miles of road, what we should be doing annually, what it costs us to do it, then it's just a matter of, like we're going through that right now, what are those options for addressing that? And that's,
So I wonder how Bill's way of figuring this out compares to Marysville approach, which is to say, we're gonna take 1/25 of the streets, and here's what it costs to fund them, and we're gonna put money in the budget for that every year.
Yeah, that was essentially the goal. The other goal or metric I believe council members had was to try and get the poor percentage rating down below 5% overall. And I believe it was around 4% for 2019. But of course, it depends on if you have another bad winter, and then, more potholes and whatnot, so it changes year over year.
But that was just, that 125th, that was just your paving. That didn't include all your road furniture, your signs, your
We had a
signals, all
separate,
that, right?
no, that was totally separate,
Yeah,
so
so
this was
that's-
just paving.
Yeah.
It also
Just
included
strictly.
curb reconstruction and then putting in the ADA compliant
Ramps.
crosswalks, ramps.
I just can't seem to shake it out of my head that, to get that 1.6 based on the last slide.
Can you go to the last slide?
You're essentially talking about two new taxes. You get the $5 tax on the license.
The permissive tax.
And then obviously a property tax.
Reality.
To get there, and then, I know it's historical data, but then you give the citizens a double whammy, and then all of a sudden we lose that $800,000, and then we're still back in the hole again.
Right.
And then you got a town full of upset people, and we're still in a hole.
Yeah,
And
which
that's,
is,
yeah, the question you go, is 1 mil adequate versus you do 2 mils, which actually that totals the 1.6.
right.
And I guess to the point last night, then you, how do you assess that other, the permissive fee?
When I think, it's kind of like doing your household budget, in that you want to have some reserve set aside. And that's kind of how I view that permissive vehicle tax. If really push came to shove, that could be enacted, and that would give you your $200,000 a year. But I don't think that should be our first go-to. I continue to stand by, we should just eliminate the credit. And I don't care what the W-2s say, because it's not even germane at this point. Eliminate the credit, get those monies in. If it generates 1.2 million or 1.6 million or 2 million, that's all wonderful. But, councils have been sitting in these seats for 20 years saying we don't have enough money, but nobody has the political strength to say, no, we're going to rescind that credit, because it's not about anybody sitting in these seats getting reelected. It's doing what's best for the city overall. And giving a credit back is, anymore, I think it tends to be more of a, it's not as widely accepted as maybe it once was. Because I think other municipalities are coming to the same realization that we cannot give back money and then say we still don't have enough money. But if we were to do that, and prior to coming in here tonight, I was sitting here going, because Tom and I, we had this discussion about, well, how much does that generate? It's a swag. We don't know. We don't know really what we're giving back. But I just said, okay, based on 30% of our income coming from outside of the city, 1/3 of the income that people are paying income tax on coming from outside the city. And you say, take half of that, and then say that is how much you're actually, that is what going to municipalities where they would be getting a refund. So they're paying at least 1.8% somewhere else. And then take half of that, which is what you're giving back, that's about $1.25 million. And that's just a real quick swag. But whether it's 1.25 or 2 million, it really doesn't matter. Because obviously we need the monies. We're not, anyone, and we can hear people that in the public will say, oh, well, you guys are just doing a cash grab, you're doing this, you're doing that, you have golden toilets. Well, obviously when we get those people into Citizens Academy and they sit down here and they see, no, we don't have golden toilets. We run a very tight fiscal ship. But I mean, we will, otherwise, we're gonna be having this discussion 3 years from now. Because now you're gonna have your 3 years of W-2s. And we're gonna be 3 more years of additional deficit. So as opposed to 100 streets that are failed or poor condition, we're gonna have 130. And, you know, here we sit. You know, the other potential option, I think this would be a great, if you want political power, this would be a great one to go. And I was telling Justin this beforehand. Again, cocktail napkin type figures. Chief Donahue admits he's overfunded. He realizes that, you know, the fire EMS is generating more cash than what is necessary. He could use, put it this way, he could use less cash. So, and the information you gave us, you show the rec levy generates 2.5 million, something like that, a year? 2.3 million a year is what in 2019 the rec levy did. If we took his 0.7, backed it off by 0.15, so and obviously that would have to go to the voters, right? Because that was a voted in thing. So we would actually have to put it on and say, please vote to reduce your taxes. Take it down to.
Reallocate.
No, reduce. 0.55, from 0.7 to 0.55. He loses $2.3 million. At the same point in time, we say, Chief, turn up your third-party billing.
That generates about $1 million.
Turn back up. So now his total loss is maybe $1.3 million, which is probably viable, just based on the conversations that we've had. And then we go back and we say, okay, citizens, we've taken that money. Now what we want to do is go ahead and put a temporary 0.15 on for roads, give us 2.3 million, you don't have to mess with anything else. So it's a net of 0 to the residents, provided they're not using EMS.
Even if
So-
they are, they're.
And even if they are, I mean, it's third-party billing, it's going to their insurance companies. But that's a lot of balls in the air, it's a lot of coordination, it's a lot to do.
It's a lot of communication.
It's a lot of
to
communication.
Educate the public about it.
It's a lot of communication.
Well, what about, just spitballing, I was thinking about this a couple weeks ago, but what is our reserve fund percentage we do? Is it 17%?
Yeah.
Yeah, 17.
I mean, Dean always argued that historically, he thought was too high.
Mm-hmm.
Even we reduced that 0.5% or 1%, and, you know, put that money back into, instead of, you know, holding on to it like Lions' blanket just in case something, you know, that we put it back to work for the people, you know?
And-
Reduced it to 15%. What would that 2%?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
That's
the
But-
hard part is you want it dedicated, that would generate some dollars, but I think what we're trying to do is get a dedicated.
We need an ongoing revenue stream. And
And
that's
that's
gonna
why-
give us a one-shot deal with a very small increment.
No, it's a yearly thing, though.
Yeah, but we're not putting 17% aside every year. We've built that up.
Right.
And now that's staying there, we may not have to put anything in, actually, sometimes we have to spend it down. Because remember, there a couple of years ago, we were like 24%, we spend all that down.
I mean, there's also, yes, there's the reallocation option, or the variation of what you've discussed, George. There's also, if if you pull out the anti-2016 levy, the principal objection was, city doesn't have a plan, and I think it's pretty clear we do have a plan now. Maybe it wasn't as clear then, but I think we did then as well. I think we had a plan, and it was pretty good, it was pretty ambitious, it was 3 buckets, and it was permanent. If you just look at it and said, you know, a property tax, you could go the property tax millage rate, then you don't have to deal with some of the feedback that we got from the work that Marie Keister did when she did the surveys of the residents was the concern about the credit. That came back, some of the criticisms were, I don't understand it, it's permanent, and this 50% credit, in that case, they were arguing it should be more. So, but, so, do you, that's why the millage has a simplicity, has a little more simplicity, I think, to it. 1 mil or 1.5 mils or 2, whatever it is, because you're not, it doesn't affect if somebody's, it's separate from the income tax piece. It's not a,
I agree.
mean-
I think that's a better way to go. First of all, I think the public needs to have a voice in, I mean, we're basically giving them an option to fund this, and it's, I think they need to have a voice on whether they want to do it or not. We all know that we need the money, if we're gonna do what we should be doing with roads, but I think we gotta give them a vote, we gotta give them a choice. I think the millage thing might be a little bit easier to explain and a little bit more palatable. It's not gonna generate everything we need, but it's, if we do 1.5 mil, what would be probably?
1.2.
I'm just afraid that we, they get into the ballot box and then it's, a mill here and the schools are, 4 mills here and there's a mill for this and a mill for that.
The
and like-
timing's next thing, the schools are coming up this fall. so,
Right.
I mean,
On a renewal.
Yeah.
They're not, their new money is not until after 2022. And that's, our window really here is
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
24 months,
Yeah.
starting, hopefully starting this year.
Well, they're back on in November. Didn't they say that last night for that 10-year renewal?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
for
November
renewal.
is
But it's-
In November.
Yeah, and, right.
And it's an election, presidential election year, and it's just,
High turnout.
I mean, it cuts both ways, because we were talking about considering a special in August, but it turns out that the cost of doing a special has gone up because of the cost of technology, and so now it's close to $125,000, $130,000.
it's almost as much as the permissive.
So
tax
I
rate.
can't recommend that in good
Yeah,
conscience to council that we do a special, that's just,
Right.
it used to be, it was a fraction of that. So your choices now would be, if you're looking at the ballot box, either for what George's option is, or property tax would be the general in November, which would mean teeing something up by August, or the May primary in 21. Or you just, you put it out there, and as we talked about before, it fails, and you gotta take it back. And is there, I guess to George's point about the credit, we've had this discussion before, Hannah got into this issue, was they told the voters, we need to pass the levy. If we don't pass the levy, then we'll have no choice but
That was my thought too.
to roll the credit back. And if it's approved, I think actually they went to full credit. So for the resident who was, yeah, because they were current, like, they had 0.8%, 80% credit, I think is what it was.
0.833.
Yeah, 0.8333. And it passed, so they now give full credit. But had it not passed, they were gonna ratchet it back, not to 0, but to some amount that was gonna generate the amount they needed. Sean's recent estimate of individuals who leave the city for employment elsewhere is close to 80%. That's gone up. And most of those individuals are taking advantage in some way, not taking advantage, but they have used the credit.
Well, and the other part of that is, as you look at the demographics and the build-out of our residential areas, especially in the south end, now where you have the more higher-priced houses, and all those people, they're in the city, and they're not working in the city for the most part. Most of those people, down Cheshire and down that whole area are working in the city, they're going south. So that gives you, that probably further increases that amount of that credit that money you're giving back.
Right.
Just because it's a higher household incomes.
That's also where we lost pretty badly. Yeah, precinct by precinct was down there. A lot of that
Absolutely.
was-
That's because they get, they get those NCAs or whatever they got.
They have
they're-
that in
they're paying off-
place.
Yeah, they get.
But that's why, if you were gonna, tinker with the credit, I mean, obviously, there's your school of thought, George, which is if you live in the city but work somewhere else, you should be paying taxes because why shouldn't you be paying taxes? But that's,
Because you
as
live
Ken
in the city.
mentioned earlier, there's
Well, you still
political
pay
dynamics.
taxes, you're just getting credit. I mean, it's kind of.
You're not paying-
But then why doesn't Columbus give people that live in Delaware credit because they're only in Columbus 8 hours a day? They're in Delaware 16 hours a day plus a weekend. See, it's just ass backwards in my opinion. Who should be given the credit? It should be where you're working. It shouldn't be where you're living. You're consuming more resources here than you're ever going to be wherever your workplace is. So, but when I guess at the end of the day, whatever we do, we need to be committed to doing something. We can't do what we did 4 years ago. Oh, it failed. Tuck my tail. Let's talk about it in 3.5 years. If it fails, we need to have a plan. Either say, we're going to then do this, either this is your option, voters, do this, or else we need to do this because we can continue to kick this can down the road for another 20 years and not do anything. And our roads will just progressively get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Or we can buck up and do the right thing and say, no, we are going to get this funding one way or the other. Here's your options. And if it doesn't, maybe the option is okay. Then we have a special in the spring. Then we have we have May election. Then we have the next general, and we just do what the schools did. Because if it's important, we should be going back after it every time, just like the schools do until it's passed. Had we done that, we would have been on the ballot 12 times by now. And I guarantee if we were on the ballot 12 times, we would have passed it once. So it's only through our own inaction that we have failed to get these monies that we require. My opinion. Off my soapbox. Sitting down. Blood pressure's going back down.
Just kind of on a side note, not really, but most of our bike paths we're building is developer fund. Developers put it in, right?
And impact fees.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Some are grant funded, but,
I got a call just about, why are you guys talking about roads when you guys are constantly building, bike paths?
yeah. But we're finding that while a lot of residents view those as important connections to get around. And, but we do have a member of the public here who's attended a lot of our council meetings. At some point you want to ask the public, but we did do that feedback survey that's on Access Delaware that talks about what residents wanted to see, which was temporary, and address the credit. I don't think they were saying address the credit by lowering it. I think they were saying address the credit by increasing it. That's why I think if you focus on property tax, that doesn't become necessarily part of that conversation.
And would you make that a temporary?
Yeah, it'd be 5 years. This is what we're going to do. It's going to raise 1.6 a year, whatever the amount is. If it's 1.5, it raises 1.2. If it's 1, it raises 8. But it's going, and this is our commitment. We're going to do, we're going to increase our level of service in terms of our road repaving. We're going to start with our backlog of roads that are in poor and in fair condition. And in year 4.5, if we've kept our promise, we would ask that it be renewed. And you'd have to put it back on the ballot. And if it doesn't pass, I think that's when, I guess if you could say, we're going to give it 3 opportunities. And on the 3rd opportunity, if we can't get it passed, then we go to the Hellinger model, which is you,
I agree, at some point, if.
You have to
if
say-
the voters aren't willing
Yeah.
to figure out a way to help fund it,
Yeah.
then I would be in support of rolling back
right, we've just,
the credit, and then we'll have more data on what that
Yeah.
means.
we've just we just only had really two votes, one in 2003 and one in 2016. Both were no's that, and 16 was overwhelming, but it was a presidential election, it was a large ask, it was permanent. I think if you had more, if voters just continued to say no, and you said we continue to have an issue, that's, I think, probably more defensible to say we have no choice but to
Yeah.
consider this credit. But,
Hearing what I've heard, my preference at this point would be to put the property tax levy for $1.5 million on in May as a 5-year temporary and see where that goes. And then if that doesn't pass, then we can decide if we put something else on, we try income tax increase. And yeah, I'm in favor at the point where we don't get it funded another way, then we probably don't have any other options.
And is there any, so right now, the special is out, obviously, because of the cost. You just put it on, and then, I mean, that's another conversation, but. in November.
How much you say on that average price? It was what, 87 or 78?
Go back to that,
$87.
Justin.
87
$87.
for 1 mil.
$250,000 house.
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I don't want to be half pregnant. I would go for 2 mils. I'd go for 2 mils,
If you're
be
gonna-
$174, and you would get all
For
the
the
money.
year.
Yeah, and that would give you all the money that then, you would be insured that, because the last thing we want to do, just imagine if we went in,
This is $174.
yeah, and,
It's $15 a month, basically.
yeah, but if we underfunded it, and then we come back, and they're like, we gave you 5 years worth of time. We really don't see that. It's like, well, you know, asphalt went up to $120 a ton, you know, or whatever, and, you know, then we make excuses. And then, you know, I would rather go big.
And it's not
Again, it's
that
still
big.
temporary.
And
It's not that big. It's not that big.
I agree.
And that way then, boom, we can set ourselves up for success, hopefully, maybe.
Actually, that 2 mils is basically $14.15 or 50 cents a month.
A month?
Yeah, for, $174 a year. But that's a lot more palatable when you say that to when somebody goes, my taxes are going up $175, you know? I know it doesn't seem like a lot of
Yeah.
money, but,
Not a month.
50 cents
I
a
mean, a
day.
year,
Yeah,
It's still,
it's $87 a half, basically. You're
Right.
only gonna notice.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the education
Yeah.
is,
I'm on board with that, 2 mils and
yeah.
5-year temporary.
I mean, I think we have the plan. Bill's got a pretty good plan, I think.
And that would allow us to keep that permissive tax in our back pocket. We wouldn't have to enact that.
Mhm.
I disagree, I think we enact it, we put it towards other things that aren't getting funded, guardrails and all the traffic safety stuff. It's $5 on it, if you got 3 cars, it's $15 every year tax. It gives us a pot of money that we can use for something, all these other things that also aren't getting done. I think the traffic safety things are.
Oh, I think so too, but
important for roads.
based on the numbers we're working with, I think we would be fully funded. I don't think we would need it. If we needed it, I would do it, but I definitely wouldn't pull the trigger on it until after it
Yeah,
was,
at the same time.
until after we got this ask met by the voters. Because if we go out there and say, because right now, we know based on the surveys we've done that there's that 15% or 17% of the population that, heck no, I'll never, my taxes are way too high, I'll never pay another dime in taxes, there's that component. And then there's the people that can't be swayed, which is another 17%. And this and that, so if we want to reduce that ammunition to those that are in that second 17% and the ones that can go either way.
Bill sent me an email earlier, he was out today. He indicates we should focus on the big ask to satisfy the total need and let voters know that we aren't grabbing at every dollar we can. If the levy fails again, we can always enact the license fee then in the future. I'd rather delay the license fee increase for a better shot at a larger ask that addresses the gap and provides funds to catch up on the backlog. I mean, there's different perspectives on it, but I think that's a pretty fair one. What's your appetite for this general?
I'm fine with it.
I mean, you put it out there, I think you
Again, I
just,
tell you, like I did last time, we're not raising your taxes. You know, that's a misconception that city council's raising your taxes. The voters are voting for it. They either vote for it or they don't. All we can do is ask. All we can do is ask. And explain why and have a plan, just like they're asking. They want to see a plan, they want it to be,
temporary.
temporary, and, this is everything that we spent a lot of money asking people about, getting your feedback, this is what we've heard, this is everything you've asked, and all you can do is say,
50 cents a day.
what do you want to do,
And Access Delaware that we launched a year and a half ago was all about trying to get that information out to the public and what's the public thinking. And then the question is, our role obviously is just to put information out there.
I think it's fine. I think we should definitely go for the general, and then if it doesn't pass, you can go for the primary, and if it doesn't pass, alternative B.
3 strikes.
Yeah. Oh,
I think there's very little chance it's gonna pass in the general. I think just coming back and asking for it 5 or 6 months later is not gonna be that much more valuable, but that's just my opinion.
Why don't you think would pass in the general?
Well, one, the schools have a levy on it.
That's true, that's true.
The focus is on the big election. It's a very divisive election.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got a lot more chances of people coming out and going, no, 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 in an election like that versus an election. And the people who are gonna come out in the election in May are the people who
Yeah.
care about this issue, That's just my opinion. I mean, I think our biggest failures were the permanent levy and the size of it, but I think we just timed it wrong.
Yeah.
I just think that divisive election was not the time.
but what's it cost us to put it on in November?
It's virtually zero.
Virtually zero, so
Because
no
you already-
harm, no foul.
Yeah, there's
Put it
also
on.
that.
Put it on, get,
Flies below,
yeah, put it on, let the people decide. If they don't want to do it, that's fine. But,
Just to see if you
we
could get a higher
can't wait
post,
another 4
if you could
years.
actually increase your margins. If you could.
Yeah, what was the numbers before?
47, it was pretty resounding. It was 2/3. But again, it was, if you did the analysis precinct by precinct, there was areas where we were more successful than others. I think this has more, this I think would resonate better, just because it's not as large, it's temporary, and it's, again, backed up by a plan. And it's not, it doesn't include those other connection projects. Not to say we're not gonna do those at some point, but it's focused on fix it first.
I definitely think we need to talk about this at full council session too,
Mhm.
and
Oh,
just
yeah.
get it, just get it
Yeah.
moving. But Graham and I have to go, so.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
George,
Apologize.
what do
No
you
problem.
want, sort of next steps, do you want us to maybe at the part 2 work session in March talk about this? What are you thinking? I mean, obviously, council will get all this information.
Right.
What's the thinking?
I mean, I think we need to have a good work session discussion around this.
On
It
this
doesn't-
topic?
On this topic. It doesn't have to be a full work session dedicated to this, but I think, hey, we chowed through this in 25 minutes or so. And I don't think it would take that much longer on council, if even that long. If we, put out here, this is what we've discussed.
Well, the next work session is scheduled for March.
Right.
And most of that was going to be dedicated to just doing our work program. That's not going to take that long. It could be that part 2 of that work session is devoted to a review with the finance committee as
think that would be-
discussed.
I think that'd be useful.
You know, that way it's, we're continuing, we just don't want to let it
No, we can't let it,
linger.
yeah, can't let it die on the vine.
Um,
Okay.
And at some point, getting feedback from the public.
All right,
I mean, obviously, that's all part of that process. but,
absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Letting them weigh in. Okay, then I'll see if we can get that pulled together. You had, was there anything, did you feel that this was helpful, the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
What was presented?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And we'll research a little more of the inside millage question.
Yeah.
And I think your discussion, George, earlier about their other public safety needs,
Yeah, when you look at our budget, you see, yeah, the fire and EMS and the police, I mean, yeah, those two combined consume the
Yeah.
majority of our monies.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think if to show ourselves in our true light, obviously, if we're overfunding something, you know, which we're just as responsible, we need to put that in front of the voters and/or, you know, back that off to a level. We don't want to stub our toe. But at the same
No.
point in time, you know, unless we're about to build 3 more fire stations in short order, you know, do we need that level of funding? Don't know, but that's for the
Yeah.
chief.
yeah. And that's really maybe a future finance committee topic. And speaking of that, we had future,
Yeah.
I didn't want to, oh, you do have public comments.
Yeah, we
I'm
do
sorry,
have public
George.
comments.
Yeah, we
Well,
do
that's
have
fine.
public-
Yeah. Would anyone from the public like to come forward and make us any comments?
I'm just an active listener tonight.
Okay, all right,
I have comments later, so
all right,
gotta go.
all right.
Thanks for
Have a
being
good
here.
one. All right. Yeah, so, yeah, future meeting dates.
We were thinking you want to do a more regular, I know Justin was used to that Marysville, but you know, keeping the finance committee.
Yeah, I mean,
Quarterly, monthly, bi-monthly.
I mean, maybe every other month, I would think, you know?
I think there's enough to talk about.
Okay.
And that way then we can
Okay.
kind of stay on top
Especially
of it.
given the transportation topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. We'll do that. And then Elaine, I don't know if these afternoon times work.
Generally, for me, they do, like this time and this day,
Yeah.
generally looks okay, so.
Okay,
Tuesday afternoons work for me.
check with Chris.
Like for finish,
Yeah, whatever, I'm good.
yeah, earlier on some Tuesdays would work, but this is the time.
Okay. All right, and let's see, any other comments? You got anything?
That's about it. I've said what I had to say.
Yeah, okay, well, good deal. In that case, let's adjourn at 5:33.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank